We are at the dawn of a new Cold War. We're witnessing the beginning of something similar to what defined the world just a few decades ago that will set the geopolitical scene of our time. Living in a world where every aspect of life is somehow digital, technology will inevitably be a substantial part of this Cold War. In early August 2020, Donald Trump started an executive order which would bar transactions from WeChat and TikTok. It's a pretty vague description of a ban on two of the biggest apps in the world. That's not the issue though, because more apps are just destined to rise up soon. But this is the latest step in the rise of digital iron curtains, a phenomenon that will lead to a divided and fragmented tech world. And it's not just between the US and China, it involves a lot of global and domestic tensions. Tech-based economic warfare has basically become a bargaining token for the governments of the world in the scene of international relations. China and India have had a long-lasting border dispute that until now was resolved literally with fistfights. But this year, following a deadly border clash, India got fed up and just banned over 200 Chinese apps, around 200 more under review, plus potential restrictions on Huawei 5G equipment. Huawei, having already suffered from many sanctions by the US, also lost the battle of selling its leading 5G equipment to the UK and other European countries. For many years, foreigners in China have had to use a VPN to escape the Communist Party's Big Brother-style Great Firewall, to be able to access websites banned by the CCP on account of eliminating risks to the state and ideology from the internet. With recent events, Chinese or even American citizens in the US may need to use a VPN to escape the Great American Firewall, which is being set up on accounts of threats to national security, foreign policy, and economy. Really, tomato, tomato, call it what you want, it's all the same. Democracies and dictatorships all around the world already have or are setting up their versions of the Great Firewall, which really damages the free flow of information and open trade of both software and hardware. Now, internet restrictions aren't that new at all. They've been around for quite a few years in many countries, mainly aimed at controlling people and protecting state interests. But there are new methods for it that are still being developed. Iran, Russia, and other nations have developed national intranets, allowing them to unplug an entire nation's access to the World Wide Web while maintaining internal services run on domestic servers. Iran actually exercised this option for the duration of a week back in November 2019 following widespread protests, so only a handful of government-authorized users had access to the rest of the world. But now, the new motivation that has compelled many otherwise open nations to join this trend of imposing internet restrictions has been the threat of losing technological supremacy and control over their own national security and economic sovereignty. Countries like the US that have exported their manufacturing to China and other developing nations now risk not having the ability of their superior services make up for these losses. In the long term, as global tensions rise, it's likely that countries will tighten up their economies and then look more inwards, leading to countries with enough sovereignty and infrastructure creating tech bubbles around themselves, banning any foreign competition to their domestic tech companies, and then forcing markets under their influence to use the technology over the competition. So, where does the human story fit in here? Well, for me personally, as an Iranian who lived there for the first 13 years of my life and still regularly visit, it's pretty normal to need a VPN to access most websites and then have to find new VPNs because the government just cracked down on the last few that I was using. It's normal for me that Iranian apps get banned from the App Store because of sanctions, or that I had to learn how to pirate games and movies at the age of 7. It's becoming even more concerning now as the government keeps talking about the national intranets replacing the internet. This may soon become the experience of all of us, chasing VPNs or even region-specific devices to use as we travel physically or virtually from one digital iron curtain to another. Countries, or at least economic and political blocs all around the world, seem to be going down a path of isolationism and regionalism, giving rise to a very interesting period of change and uncertainty. With rising restrictions, the Wild West that was once the internet will become less open and global and ever more political. The hands of tech giants like Google or Tencent could be cut short by governments who prefer some censorship and control. Or, on the other hand, they could also benefit from fueling this isolation with their ecosystem and lobbying power. Protectionism would most certainly allow companies to expand their influence in their region and create their own digital iron curtains with their technologies, like a certain brand has been pushing pretty strongly. As a young person attempting to start a tech company, this of course concerns me on a European and international level. Will my startup or startups be able to sort of expand and form international relationships as many other tech companies have in the past? Or maybe these protectionist policies will actually save my startup from competition, as they have for many companies in countries like Iran or China. The world, mainly in the past 2 decades, has been transformed by widespread access to technology. But this is only the beginning. We've only recently seen a glimpse of a push towards transhumanism, which at some point in the near future, maybe even in the next 2 decades, will allow our very thoughts to become at the same time socialized and commoditized. It's really not a good idea to have technological isolationism in a case like that, both in terms of information sharing and the ever-increasing threat of states having control over our very brains. This still sounds like science fiction to most, but it's really not that unlikely of a future. I imagine it would be pretty unpleasant to have to sort of change your Neuralinks region access every time you travel, or even have certain thoughts and sensations restricted in specific parts of the world. All of these sound like wild speculations, and they are, but my point is that we are approaching uncharted territory, both in terms of technology and, of course, geopolitics. This is a Cold War that's eerily similar to the last one, but also radically different. On an individual level, most of us will just be observers, but it's important to be aware of these changes, and if at all possible, find ways to fight to protect our interests. Welcome to the age of digital iron curtains. Enjoy whichever side you have landed on.